The galaxy had long learned that war was an expensive art and peace, when it lasted, was an uncomfortable lie. Across the stars, the most ancient and powerful civilizations gathered once again on the crystalline moon of Viral Prime. The Hall of Accord, a place carved out of black stone older than Earth's continents, stood solemn and silent as 13 generals of 13 species took their places. One by one, they spoke of conflict, not in outrage or fear, but in the cold efficiency of those who'd worn war like a second skin for centuries. Their latest dispute stretched across the Krellian border systems, where resources shimmered beneath irradiated sand and entire species had been vaporized in posturing skirmishes. Blood had been spilled, but no victor declared. This time, they agreed. Perhaps the talk of peace was not just ceremony. Perhaps a mediator could prevent what would otherwise become a war of extinction. They spoke of Earth with disdain first, then caution. A backwater world barely one generation out of their own atmosphere, yet reports called their progress disturbingly exponential. No empire had expanded so fast, adapted so ruthlessly. Some dismissed humanity as uncivilized. Others, more quietly, warned that humans didn't play by galactic rules. They rewrote them. And so, in a gesture wrapped in politics and layered with traps, an invitation was extended. Earth was to send a negotiator to help mediate the Krellian conflict. The aliens did not expect compliance. They expected confusion, perhaps even a minor diplomatic incident to justify Earth's exclusion from future decisions. If things escalated, even better. Earth accepted. When the transport ship finally landed on Viral Prime's embassy deck, the gathered dignitaries braced for a delegation, perhaps a cluster of scholars, or at least a formal envoy. Instead, a single figure descended the ramp. No ceremonial robes, no entourage, just a man in a black suit tailored tight over broad shoulders, with a silver tie pin shaped like Earth's continents. No weapons visible, unless you counted the polished briefcase in his left hand. No smile, no words, just the sharp click of polished shoes on alloyed stone. The chamber reacted in murmurs. The Varkashi admiral clicked its mandibles in disapproval. The Lauren delegate blinked her cluster eyes in confusion. Even the cold-blooded Ulmerics, whose kind had detonated stars in negotiations before, shifted uneasily. He paused at the foot of the council table. The gathered generals loomed above him in thrones of organic steel and luminous bone. They expected reverence. He offered none. Name and designation, barked the chamber scribe. A robed AI fused into a pillar of obsidian light. Rook, envoy of Earth, the man said flatly. The name meant nothing to them, but something in his voice, casual, almost bored, made them all a little quieter. You arrive without documentation, without attendance, without adherence to council custom, snapped the Varati war leader. I'm early, Rook replied, opening the briefcase with a precise snap. Inside was a sleek datapad, which he placed gently onto the central console. Its screen flickered to life, displaying data streams the council hadn't even known were accessible. Fleet positions, strategic vulnerabilities, satellite surveillance of each general's private compounds. You asked Earth to mediate a war, he continued, eyes cold as orbit glass. We interpreted that as an early stage of hostilities. The council went still. We offered diplomacy, growled the Ulmeric's general. No, Rook said, voice dropping into something quieter and far more dangerous. You offered theater. You expected us to send someone who plays by your rules. But we don't send diplomats to wars. The Lauren matriarch narrowed her many eyes. Then what does Earth send? Rook looked up for the first time, locking eyes with her and then sweeping his gaze across the room. We send closers. No one spoke. Somewhere in the high rafters, a ventilation unit let out a soft exhale, the only sound in the dead silence that followed. You're bluffing, said the Ulmerics. Your species is new. You've never fought a war beyond your planet. You have no understanding of what's required. Rook smiled. It was not a pleasant thing. That's your mistake. You think because we haven't fought your wars, we haven't fought at all. But Earth's history is war written in fire and blood, across every border and ideology you can imagine. What you call a border dispute, we call a Tuesday. A sharp holographic flicker burst from his datapad. 13 spheres, representing the general's home fleets, lit up in red. A single line of code scrolled across the screen. Remote override initialized. The Ulmerich's general stood, claws flexing, but froze as the image changed. Real-time footage from orbit. One of his dreadnoughts, a leviathan of mass and metal, began to tilt, drifting powerlessly. Non-lethal demonstration, Rook said calmly. Your vessel will regain control in 73 seconds. You'll find all your encryption has been rewritten using 1980s Terran video game logic. Our intern thought it would be funny. He stepped back, closing the briefcase. Now, he said, we can continue this farce and waste the next 12 hours on posturing. Or you can shut up, sit down, and let me do what you asked for. He didn't wait for permission. He sat, hands folded, eyes sharp. The council didn't argue. One by one, the generals took their seats. Even the Ulmerichs, though his claws twitched with insult, kept silent. Above them, the stars burned on, indifferent to politics. And far below, a man in a suit, still and unmoved, began the work of breaking a war before it started. He never said thank you. He never asked permission. But from that moment on, none of them would ever call humans primitive again. Rook sat at the center of the council chamber, an island of stillness surrounded by suspicion and barely concealed aggression. The chamber had once been designed for harmony. Arched ceilings that resonated with speech, bioluminescent panels that pulsed softly in response to emotion. But under the weight of this assembly, the architecture strained. There was no harmony here. Just 13 warlords, each from species older and more violent than Earth could claim, seated in a ring of authority. And in their midst, one human, unarmed, outnumbered, and unbothered. No one moved. A recording drone hovered overhead, quietly humming as it captured the historic scene. The Varadi war leader flared his neck crests in silent fury, while the Lauren matriarch stared with blank, glimmering eyes. The Ulmerich's general hadn't taken his eyes off Rook since the moment his ship lost power in orbit. That violation had made him a personal target. It also made him afraid. Rook unfolded his fingers slowly, like a pianist stretching before a piece. "Shall we begin?" he asked, his voice level. "You insult us," the Varkashi rasped, voice filtered through a translator collar that struggled to contain the tone. "You ignore protocol, violate sovereign systems, and then expect discussion?" Rook looked at the general, as if studying an unusual insect. "I don't expect anything. Expectations are for people who assume they're in control." The room shifted subtly. One or two generals adjusted in their seats, barely perceptible motions that, among these apex predators, signaled something rare: doubt. Not fear. Not yet. But something had fractured in the power balance, and they could feel it. Rook tapped his fingers against the side of his briefcase. He did not open it. He didn't need to. The demonstration had already set the tone. Now he was speaking to minds shaped by centuries of dominance and hierarchy, minds that only respected leverage. And he had it. "You asked for a negotiator," he said, locking eyes with the Lauren matriarch. "What you meant was a puppet. Someone who would sit here for weeks and trade pleasantries while you maneuvered fleets in the shadows." "You speak as if you know our ways," she said, her voice like wind over ice. "I do," Rook replied. "That's why I was sent." "Then you were sent to die," snapped the Ulmerich's general, leaning forward. His exoskeletal plating creaked with tension. "You bring threats and insolence. This chamber has ended species for less." "No," Rook said. "This chamber has talked species to death. You've created an empire of delay. Every piece you forged was just a war paused mid-sentence. You don't want resolution. You want ritual." That stopped them. He stood. Not a large gesture. Not dramatic. But it felt seismic. The posture of a man who was not impressed by aliens who could break him in half. Not because he didn't understand the danger, but because he had already accounted for it. "You asked who I am," Rook said quietly, pacing the center of the circle. "I'm the reason Earth never lost a second war. Not because we're stronger. Not because we're wiser. but because we never stopped learning how you fight. He pointed at the Varadi. Your fleets prioritize intimidation, big, slow, and loud. Your species believes fear precedes respect. Then to the Lauren, you manipulate through consensus, building alliances only to betray them at peak leverage. Finally, to the Almerics. And you, blunt force, overwhelming aggression, always assuming no one will match your escalation. He stepped back into the center. Earth studied every broadcast, every skirmish, every intercepted whisper. You kept looking for proof of our weakness. We looked for the shape of your thinking. Silence again, the kind that tightened around the chest. A junior delegate from the rear gallery, barely more than an assistant to the Krellian delegation, raised a trembling voice. What does Earth want? The question hung in the air, heavy and vulnerable. Rook looked toward the speaker, a creature small and fragile in comparison to the giants around it. His expression softened slightly, not sympathy, but something approximating respect. Stability, he said. Not peace. Not conquest. Just a galaxy where time isn't wasted watching the same three factions tear each other to pieces every century. And you think you can force that? The Lauren matriarch asked, curiosity slowly bleeding into wariness. No, Rook said, but I can make the cost of resisting it unacceptable. A low hum began vibrating through the chamber floor. At first subtle, then insistent. Lights flickered once. The holographic ceiling, a display of neutral starscapes, shifted to reveal a tactical feed. Earth's fleet. Not ships in orbit, but positioned across several systems. Hidden. Watching. You've been so busy measuring Earth by its history, Rook continued, voice low, that you forgot to account for its future. We're not here because we want to be feared. We're here because you're predictable. And we don't have time to indulge ancient egos. The hum stopped. The lights steadied. No missiles were launched. No ships advanced. But the message was delivered. Rook returned to his seat and opened the briefcase again. Inside, he produced a single data crystal. He placed it in the center of the table and slid it forward with 2 fingers. A treaty proposal, he said. Balanced. Enforceable. Bilateral inspections, limited demilitarization zones, and a clause for mutually assured removal of third-party agitators. You can't dictate terms to us, growled the Varkashi. I'm not, Rook replied. I'm offering you a choice. Sign this, and you live. Reject it, and Earth moves forward without you. He leaned back, watching them, his tone suddenly almost casual. Think of it as assisted evolution. This time, when silence settled, it didn't feel like discomfort. It felt like surrender, being weighed behind a dozen expressions. Rook didn't press them. He waited. And the Council, for all its power, realized it had never really been in control. Not of this meeting, not of this man, and not any more of a galaxy they thought they ruled. The corridor behind the Council chamber was quiet, but not empty. Surveillance drones tracked Rook's movement, following at a respectful distance, their blue eyes blinking in silent evaluation. Though none of the generals had spoken the words aloud, their curiosity had shifted. Suspicion had not evaporated, only coiled into a tighter spring. They wanted to know what Earth had truly become, what kind of creature it had bred in the dark between stars. Rook didn't care. Observation was a currency he had long since stopped trading in. Let them record. Let them analyze his gait, his breath, his heartbeat. All they'd find was control, sharpened over years until it became indistinguishable from calm. Waiting near the exit platform, Sarah blinked twice to sync her retinal overlay. The numbers flowing through her periphery, tactical scans, communication lags, posture reads on nearby guards, were all within expected parameters. Good. She hated improvising. Rook had signaled early, which meant the meeting had gone exactly as anticipated, or exactly as he'd made it go. With him, those were often the same. You're early, she said without greeting. Deadlines help civilizations focus, Rook replied, stepping into pace beside her. They moved without discussion toward the transport hub, neither slowing nor drawing unnecessary attention. A few alien functionaries passed them, some averting their gaze, others pretending to ignore them altogether. But none stopped them. That was the point. Rook didn't need guards. His authority wasn't conferred by escort. It radiated outward, subtle and absolute. "Any reaction from the fringe systems?" he asked. Sarah flicked her wrist, sending a secure file to his pad. Scattered transmissions. Panic disguised as procedure. No fleet movements yet, but we're monitoring every node Earth intelligence flagged. "You made your point." "I didn't make a point," he said. "I ended a pattern." Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew the weight of what had shifted. The elevator descended silently toward the hangar beneath the diplomatic spire. Below them, the curved structure of Viral Prime pulsed with its usual rhythm. A planet that had never truly known war within its own atmosphere, but had orchestrated countless ones beyond it. It was the perfect capital for a council that ruled through coercion and consensus, each member wielding their own brand of threat. "I assume the press wants statement," Rook said. Sarah snorted. "They want a parade. They're calling you the Ghost Ambassador." He tilted his head slightly. "That doesn't make sense." "They don't care. You walked into a room of predators, threatened each one, and walked out untouched. The label fits well enough." "I didn't threaten them," Rook said. She gave him a sidelong glance. "You didn't need to." At the hangar, their shuttle was prepped and idle, its sleek lines humming with a readiness that matched their own. A human-made vessel, unassuming by alien standards, but layered with so many invisible contingencies, it could rewrite the rules of engagement within 3 seconds of activation. As they approached, a voice called out behind them. "Rook." He turned without urgency. The Lauren matriarch had followed alone. Her shimmering outer cloak hung like mist around her form, and the luminous lines that usually indicated emotional alignment pulsed in colors that Rook could only partially decode. Disquiet, interest, calculation. "You said Earth seeks stability," she said. "But what you delivered was ultimatum. Is that the foundation you believe will last?" "No," Rook answered. "But it's the only way we'll get to one that does." She stepped closer. For a heartbeat, even the background noise of the hangar seemed to retreat. "The Council will recover," she said. "Adapt even. But what happens when Earth becomes the thing it sought to contain?" Rook looked at her for a long moment, then glanced to the shuttle. "Then we'll send someone for us." The matriarch studied him as if seeing the species behind the man, not just the man himself. She gave a small, slow nod. It wasn't agreement. It was acknowledgement. Rook turned without ceremony and entered the shuttle. Sarah followed, sealing the hatch behind her. Inside, the craft purred to life. The AI whispered confirmations in clipped tones, engaging protocols as the vessel lifted from the hangar and turned toward the stars. Sarah watched him from the co-pilot seat. "She'll speak of this," she said. "The others will listen. They'll want to understand you." "They won't," Rook replied, eyes fixed forward. "Because they're still asking why Earth sent a killer in a suit. They never considered we didn't see the difference." The shuttle breached the upper atmosphere, slipping silently into the corridor of stars. Behind them, the Council struggled to reshape its narrative. Ahead, the galaxy braced for the new one Earth had just written. Rook glanced up, expression unreadable. "Earth didn't send me to negotiate. They sent me to finish something they already understood." The Ulmerich's general tilted his head slowly, predator eyes narrowing. "And what, exactly, do you think has been finished here?" There it was, the edge of the truth, sharp and waiting. The illusion of control that had wrapped these ancient powers in comfort was fraying fast. Rook's presence wasn't a ripple. It was a correction, a recalibration of what power meant in a galaxy where Earth had grown not just strong, but quiet in its strength. He didn't answer the general's question directly. Instead, he stood, the movement deliberate, measured. "You believe this is about territory, influence, or protocol?" Rook said, voice smooth as stone under running water. "It's not. This was never about Krellian borders or mining rights. It was about seeing who among you could be reasoned with before we committed to alternatives." That quieted the room in a different way than before. It wasn't the hush of intimidation or awe, but the brittle, thoughtful silence that comes before a reckoning. The realization that they were no longer defining the terms of engagement. You tested us? The Lauren matriarch's voice had lost its glacial polish. Beneath it, there was something raw. No, Rook replied. We observed you. Testing implies uncertainty. We were never uncertain. He paused as the datapad blinked once on the table. New data unfolded in a web of pale red light. Cross-faction trade routes, economic dependencies, black market military transactions. Every unspoken deal and every betrayal cloaked in ceremony now bared open for all to see. The council erupted in a rustle of motion, talons flexing, gills flaring, antennae twitching. Every gesture of discomfort made visible in a way words never could. You've built an empire of mutual leverage, Rook continued. Peace through paranoia. Treaties held not by goodwill, but by the constant fear that if one of you moved, the others would pounce. That's not a coalition. It's a deadlock. The Varkashi war leader spat a curse, his voice vibrating through 6 layers of subsonic tones. Rook didn't flinch. The only reason it's lasted this long, he said, is because you never introduced an unknown into the equation. Now they had. Earth. A species that hadn't asked to be invited to the galactic stage. One that had arrived not in desperation or reverence, but with eyes open and knives sheathed, though never far from hand. You can't just disrupt centuries of order and call it progress, the Krellian delegate said quietly, almost pleading. There are balances older than your entire species. Then maybe they should have worked better, Rook replied. Age isn't wisdom. It's just time. The words hung heavier than the threat of war. The Ulmerics leaned forward, claws tapping in measured rhythm. And if we hadn't been reasonable, if we had attacked your envoy, destroyed your fleets. Rook looked directly at him, unblinking. Then I'd still be standing here, and 13 empires would be bleeding in places they didn't know they could bleed. There was no arrogance in his voice, only certainty. He began to pack the briefcase. Each movement was final. Each click and clasp a signal that the meeting, in every meaningful way, was over. The Lauren matriarch rose, slow and fluid. Her voice, when she spoke again, was low. What is Earth, then? In this new order you forced us to see. Rook closed the case, looked up, and gave the first smile anyone had seen from him. Insurance, he said, against your worst instincts. No applause followed. No formal conclusion to the session. The council simply remained where they were, seated in silence, as the man from Earth turned his back on them and walked the length of the chamber. His footsteps echoed louder than any of their threats had. As he neared the exit, the doors hissed open, revealing the starlit promenade beyond. Rook paused, half-turned, and spoke without looking back. We're not interested in ruling, he said, but we're done asking to be part of the conversation. And then he was gone. The chamber held its breath for a long time after, each general alone with their thoughts. No one spoke of retaliation, not out loud. Even the Ulmeric's general, whose nature demanded vengeance for humiliation, remained still. Outside, the stars watched in eternal indifference. But on Viral Prime, something had changed. Not a treaty, not a war. Something older. A shift in gravity, not physical but political. A new center of mass had been introduced to the galactic order. Earth hadn't conquered. It hadn't begged. It had redefined the arena. And somewhere, far from the shining councils and shadow wars of the galaxy, other humans watched and waited. They weren't diplomats. They weren't soldiers. They were closers, like Rook. And they were ready, because Earth had heard the call of the stars, not as a question, but as a challenge. And it had answered with a man in a suit,